A lot of people think that childhood is just something that you outgrow. That once you move out, once you're legally an adult, that the past is behind you. But if you grew up with trauma, real trauma, you already know that that's just not true. What happens in childhood doesn't disappear. It gets stored in your body and your nervous system. And unless you deal with it, it shows up again and again in how you react under stress, in how you show up in relationships, even in how you talk to yourself when nobody else is around. I want to walk you through what this looks like across a lifetime. We'll go through 5 stages: childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, midlife, and later life. I'll describe how trauma might show up for you at each of those points, how it connects back to what you went through, and what I call the exit ramp, the chance to step off the old road and take a different one. So we're gonna start with childhood around age 7 or so. Maybe you grew up in a house where anger was unpredictable, where the sound of the front door slamming made you freeze, where things like yelling or violence could break out at any time. Or maybe the opposite, right? Maybe it was quiet, cold, where maybe nobody noticed you were sad or scared. Maybe you were told, stop crying, or I'll give you something to really cry about, right? Maybe you were the one making your younger siblings dinner because your parents were gone, intoxicated, or too depressed to get out of bed. At 7 years old, you don't have adult concepts for words like abuse or neglect. You just know what you see around you. And at that age, you have a pretty simple picture of how life should work. Parents are supposed to protect kids. Parents are supposed to be bigger, stronger, calmer, right? More in charge. So when you find yourself being the one who calms your mom down after she cries, or the one who shields your siblings when dad is raging, or the one who quietly takes care of yourself because no one else will, you feel that something's backwards, even if you can't articulate it. So what children in these situations are starting to experience at this stage of life is a deep, confusing mismatch between what they believe family should be and then what they're actually living, right? They know, even at 7, that something is wrong when they're the one managing the grown-ups. They sense that they're playing a role that doesn't really belong to them, but they can't step out of it because stepping out of it might mean chaos, punishment, or neglect. So that tension between how it should be and how it is gets carried forward. And over time, kids stop calling it wrong and just start calling it normal. And what that mismatch does to the child mentally is subtle but corrosive. The confusion, the stress, the lack of understanding subtly plants this belief that the world is unpredictable and you have to stay on guard. And that belief doesn't stay in childhood. It follows you into every stage of life until you find a way to unlearn it. So at any point in life, you have the option to address the effects of these traumatic events. I like to look at it as a highway with exits that you have the option to take at different points of your life. So of course, at this age, you're not in control of most of the decision-making happening in your life. But still, this is what it can realistically look like when that trauma is addressed. So maybe a teacher notices you're always taking care of your siblings and gently tells you, that's not your job. You get to be a kid. Maybe a coach or mentor creates a space where you're safe to laugh and play without fear of being punished. Maybe a therapist helps you put words to what's happening at home and reassures you it isn't your fault. Or maybe a parent, even after years of struggle, finally makes a change and starts to show up. These experiences restore the natural order, kids as kids, adults as adults. And when that happens, children begin to rebuild trust. They start to believe that their needs matter, that safety is possible, and that love doesn't have to be earned by carrying really big burdens that were never theirs to begin with. So the next stage is adolescence. Maybe think about age 15 or 16. By the time you're a teenager, these intense things that you experienced in childhood will start to show up. And at 16, your whole life is about identity, right? Friends, dating, grades, sports, social media. You're figuring out who you are and where you belong. So if you grew up in chaos or neglect, this stage is super hard. You might push yourself to be perfect, straight A's, the star athlete, never stepping out of line, right? Because deep down, you believe that love is conditional. Or maybe you give up entirely, telling yourself it's safer not to try than to risk failing. Some teens use substances, not out of rebellion, but because it's the only way they found to quiet the noise in their heads. Others throw themselves into relationships, looking for comfort that they didn't get at home, and end up repeating that same cycle of volatility that they grew up with. What makes this stage so unique is that adolescence is supposed to be the time when you test boundaries and figure out who you are separate from your family. You're asking questions like, who am I? Where do I belong, right? What kind of person do I want to be? For most kids, that's stressful but exciting. They take risks, they try on new identities, maybe make some mistakes, and learn from them. But if you grew up with trauma, those experiments feel much more dangerous. You might not trust that you'll be accepted if you show your real self, so you hide behind roles you know are safe. Or you might chase belonging so urgently that you accept toxic friendships or relationships just to avoid being alone. So instead of building a steady sense of identity, you swing between extremes, performing, withdrawing, rebelling, all in an attempt to feel secure. So if we go back to the highway analogy, there's an exit that you can take here. Addressing trauma in adolescence usually starts with having just one relationship where authenticity feels safe. Maybe a teacher who notices when you're struggling instead of only when you succeed. A friend group where you can mess up and not be abandoned. Or a therapist who is really helpful in helping you untangle the difference between who you really are and the roles you've been forced into. These kinds of experiences let you try on the risky but necessary work of creating identity. And through that, you're learning that you can be imperfect, still make mistakes, but still belong. The next stage is young adulthood, so we're thinking maybe around age 28 or so. In your late 20s, you're supposed to be building a life of your own, right? Maybe working, paying bills, maybe you're in school, maybe even starting a family. On paper, it might look like you're grown up. But if you grew up with trauma, this stage often feels heavier than it should. So you might throw yourself into work and feel like you can't rest without guilt, because being productive feels like the only way to prove your worth. Or you might just want to minimize any time alone with your thoughts. It could also show up in dating or friendships. You can find yourself in relationships that really echo that same volatility or neglect that you grew up with. Partners who pull away, criticize, or can't be trusted. Sometimes your body even carries the trauma for you. Some people experience panic attacks that feel like they come out of nowhere. There's constant exhaustion that never really seems to get better. Or it could be things like headaches or stomach issues that doctors can't really explain. What's really unique here is that young adulthood is supposed to be about independence and building stability, choosing things like career paths, forming close partnerships, again, maybe creating a family. But trauma can distort those steps. Instead of feeling like opportunities, they can feel like traps or constant tests, right? You might worry you don't deserve stability or that it'll just be taken away if you find it. Even when you look successful, inside it feels fragile, like it could all collapse at any moment. So here's the exit you can take. In your 20s, the exit often looks like finally allowing yourself to get support instead of trying to do it all alone. That might mean therapy to work through the old rules that you've been living by, like I only matter if I'm useful, or love always comes with pain. It might mean learning to build basic routines for sleep, eating, and exercise, not as punishments, but as ways to really teach your body it's allowed to calm down. It could be setting boundaries at work so you can stop burning out, or even practicing saying no without feeling like you're gonna lose everything. When this exit is taken, you stop living only in survival mode and start feeling like your life belongs to you. The next stage is midlife, so we're thinking maybe around age 42 or so. By your 40s, the cracks are harder to ignore. Sometimes it shows up as a sudden crisis, a divorce, a health scare, losing a parent, a breakdown at work. Other times it's quieter, like waking up one day and realizing that even though you checked all the boxes, you still feel really empty inside. For many trauma survivors, this is the breaking point. The strategies that you once used to keep going, things like perfectionism, overachievement, caretaking, control, no longer work. You may find yourself asking, whose life am I living? Is this really me, or just the person I became to survive? It's a really painful question, but it's also a really important one. Mentally, this stage can feel like your whole system is rebelling against you. Anxiety or depression may get louder, burnout may feel impossible to recover from, and the gap between who you are on the outside and how you feel on the inside becomes harder to hide. So the exit here is that in midlife, it's often about slowing down instead of speeding up. It's about grieving what you lost, whether that's the childhood that you didn't get, the years spent hustling for love, or the parts of yourself that you put away to keep others comfortable. Therapy here often focuses on processing trauma directly, repairing relationships, and redefining your values. If safety isn't the only goal anymore, what is? right? Taking this exit doesn't erase the pain, but it opens the door to building a life based on honesty, connection, and meaning, not just survival. So our last stage is later in life, in your 60s or so. At this point, reflection becomes unavoidable. Careers slow down, kids grow up, the house gets quieter. Health changes start to remind you that time is finite. And with more space to think, the question tends to surface: did I live my life? Or did I live the life my trauma built? For many people, this is the first time they really allow themselves to stop running and really take inventory. And it can be sobering. Maybe you realize you spent decades overworking, always needing to be useful to feel worthy. Or you notice your relationships have been distant, never quite letting anyone close because that always felt too risky. Maybe your kids are grown and you see the ways your unhealed wounds spilled into how you parented them. It's not about blame, it's about finally seeing the threads clearly. At this stage, you can always still decide to address your trauma. It's never too late. So if the trauma is addressed, this stage can bring incredible healing. Some people begin by telling their story, whether to a therapist, a close friend, or their adult children. Naming what happened can be terrifying, but it breaks decades of silence. Others focus on repair, sitting with their children saying, here's what I carried, here's how I know it touched you, and here's how I want to show up now. Vulnerability, even this late, creates space for connection. And healing doesn't always look like a dramatic confession. Sometimes it's much smaller, but just as powerful. Asking for help without apology, letting yourself be cared for instead of always being the caretaker, or allowing someone to see your fear instead of hiding it behind control. These changes really restore dignity and intimacy in relationships. They also change what gets passed forward. You become the ancestor who interrupts the cycle, who models that even painful legacies can be healed with honesty and effort. If the trauma is not addressed, the opposite happens. The past stays locked away. You tell yourself, it was fine, or you minimize the impact because opening it up feels almost unbearable. You double down on distance or control. Maybe you keep people at an arm's length, or you avoid conversations that feel too close. These old learned behaviors, stay small, stay perfect, stay ready, remain intact. And even if you love your family deeply, that love is filtered through them. Without meaning to, those patterns get handed down. Your kids and grandkids pick up on the tension, the silence, the fear, because nervous systems learn more from what's shown than what's said. However, even here, the exit is still open. It doesn't have to be years of therapy if that feels daunting. Sometimes it starts with one honest sentence. I know I didn't always show up the way I should have. I see that now. Or one concrete repair, showing up consistently for a grandchild in a way that you couldn't for your own child. Or even just choosing softness where there used to be distance. These small shifts can really ripple forward in profound ways, softening what was hard, changing the legacy you leave behind, and giving the generations after you a different foundation to build on. When people take this exit in later life, they often describe it as peace. They find connection that feels easier, laughter that comes more naturally, and relationships that don't feel like performances. And perhaps most importantly, they know they didn't let the story end with silence. They used the time they had to change the script. When you step back and look across all these stages, the truth is really clear. Childhood doesn't stay in childhood. The ways you learn to survive can follow you into every chapter of life. But at every stage, there are exits, chances to do something different, to let someone in, to grieve what you didn't get to finally stop carrying what never was yours to hold. And here's the most important part. It's never too early, and it's never too late. Healing doesn't erase what happened, but it changes what happens next. It gives you back your future, and it changes what gets passed down to the people that you love. So if you're ready to take the next exit, and you feel like you can't do it alone, schedule a chat with us at the link in the description. Thank you so much for joining today, and we'll see you soon.